Hi everyone, I am Amy Kiefner with Inspired You Coaching and Consulting, and today I have my friend Chris Butler from Butler Funeral Home in Springfield, Illinois. He will give us some nuggets of wisdom on what it is to become a funeral director, and we'll talk a little bit about his journey to get there. So hi Chris, thanks for joining.
Hi, Amy. It's good to see you. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for your time today. I know you're very busy, and so we appreciate it. Let's start with your story of college and how you got to decide on what you wanted to become.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be with you today. It's great. Going into college, my parents, our funeral home is a family-owned business and been in our family actually probably since 1925 or so. With my great uncle Harold, and my grandfather worked here, and my dad and my uncle and my aunt. But growing up around our household, while the funeral home dominated our lives in terms of my dad, having to spend a lot of time there, it didn't dominate our lives in the fact that my parents told all of us, myself and my two sisters, older sisters, that if we wanted to consider a path, in the funeral home, it was certainly something that could be explored, but they also wanted us, they encouraged us to go to school, go to college, get a degree, and then, kind of find our way. And that's what we all did. My two older sisters ultimately went in different paths. I entered the University of Champaign with a liberal arts degree, focusing in on political science and business. I did have a really strong interest in the political world at the time. But as life evolved, and I don't think at that point in my life I even knew what the word grief was. I don't think we talked about it a lot, and I don't really think I knew what it was. I certainly hadn't experienced it in any meaningful way that I recall. And then I had a pretty profound grief experience, and kind of opened my eyes to, well, what is it that we do over there at the funeral home? And thought, well, maybe I need to get a little bit more tuned in. And so I did that. And then I would say around junior year in college, really kind of took the steps to consider it further. But I still wanted to have the alternative degree. So I finished my time and got a degree at Champaign, and then decided to work a year at the funeral home in Springfield before going to mortuary school, which there are programs all over the country. There are programs that vary in terms of length of time and so forth. And I assume we'll talk about that a little later. But I elected to go to St. Louis. It was a small program at a community college. Did that for a variety of reasons. I'd already experienced campus, education, and this was more of kind of a city. My sister lived in the area at the time, so it kind of just worked out to go there if I decided to go. But I wanted to come back and work in Springfield at the funeral home to make sure that's what I wanted to do. And I got here. I knew I'd enjoy the community. I knew I'd enjoy working with family. At least I thought I would. And ultimately, that's what the case was. I really loved it. And so I couldn't wait for mortuary school to start. And ultimately went to St. Spent, it's a 2-year program. I was able to sit out the first quarter simply because I had already had all those classes. And then after mortuary school, you serve a years of apprenticeship. So you become licensed. You have to pass a national board exam, and then you become a licensed, what they called at the time, apprentice. It's now intern, but licensed apprentice. And then when you fulfill all your obligations of that, you become a fully licensed funeral director in Illinois. Now in Illinois, it's funeral director and embalmer. And so you do have to satisfy both aspects of that. And then you're fully licensed. So I've been fully licensed since 1990.
And you guys have one of the best funeral homes I've ever encountered. So, so that's interesting. School is then, do you have to go get a bachelor's degree first, or can you go straight into mortuary school?
Well, that's the interesting point of the education. It varies even though you pass a national board exam, the requirements of the states vary greatly. So probably for the purpose of today, I'll focus in on Illinois, but I certainly know that there are websites available to explore nationwide what the requirements are. But in Illinois, it varies. You can go to Southern Illinois University at Carbondale for a 4-year bachelor degree, or you can go in Chicago, Galesburg. There's other programs as well, but those are more well-known programs. And you can do it in terms of an associate degree type program, or you can do it in terms of a diploma. Now, if you do either one of those options, you do need to have at least what I'm going to say is an associate level background in general education, at least to be able to fulfill the diploma program as an example. Now you can go to Ohio. I think it's required that you have to have a bachelor's degree, period. And that's just the way they operate. So Illinois has a little bit more flexibility in that. There's pros and cons to both approaches. Certainly, I think in our profession, what we see is, well, we're like professions. There's a shortage of people. I think second career people can do very well with a shortened educational route, but there's still some steps that they need to go through that are currently in place, and I'm not sure that will change anytime soon. I know the current requirements are all under review, but we should speak to what the requirements are today. But certainly, I know that anybody who's considering this, whether they're just beginning in their career or second career opportunities, there's certainly a lot of opportunity within the profession.
Who do you find to be the best people to come into this industry, because it is so, it's grief. So who do you find to be the best personality characteristics?
Yeah.
All that kind of thing?
Well, the people, that's always going to depend on what the role they're going to fulfill in the organization. And we need to recognize that there are all types or all sizes of funeral home organizations throughout the state. So it's going to be dependent somewhat on where you go and so forth. In general, what I find is that the profile, behavioral profile, personality profile of somebody in funeral service oftentimes does mimic that of someone who's proficient in terms of social work, social care type work. That has evolved. I would say back in the 70s or 80s, that behavioral profile served very, very well. I think in today's, you also have to be someone that is able to be able to sit with somebody, listen to them, kind of process what it is they're telling you, and then have a conversation with them about creating options, suggesting options for them, so that they can consider how best to attend to their emotional, relational, and spiritual needs that exist. And the reason I point that out is that when you look back at the 70s or 80s, 60s and all that, most people came to a funeral home and did pretty much the same thing. They had a visitation, they had a funeral, and then you went to the cemetery. And that certainly doesn't exist today. And I'm not saying that necessarily was the best model for everybody. I think we all recognize that we're all different, and we're probably going to require different solutions in today's world. However, not everybody, because of what I call funeral misconceptions, and that's something that Dr. Alan Wolfelt, a mentor of mine that I lean on quite often, actually. He runs the Center for Loss and Life Transition in Colorado, but he came up with a list of funeral misconceptions, and he refers to those. He says that's just these exist because of where we're at culturally in the world. And what he means by that is, as an example, is that, we tend to think that anything that's quick is the better route. And that if we can avoid attending to our, anything that allows us to express our emotions, we might be better off, because we don't want to, we don't want to let all that out type thing. And truthfully, whatever route is taken, you got to create a path that is going to create a healthy grief experience. And if you shortcut that or short circuit it, it can create much harder problems down the road. So yeah, it's hard to confront the reality of a death when it occurs, but receiving that emotional support from others is very, very important. Certainly, in the last year, we've recognized the complications that can exist, but essentially anything that delays a funeral is going to delay grief. And a funeral can encompass anything from a funeral to a memorial ceremony to whatever it may be. People, but it's where people need to come together to recognize that a death has occurred, and also recognize that a life's been lived.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned this past year, because Chris, my cousin, passed away right as they were changing, right in the beginning of March. And
Yeah.
we were one of your first funerals where it was like, had to switch, only 50 people and family only. And so it was definitely a different experience from when my dad passed away 30 years ago. And we were once again at Curling Egan Butler, and people wrapped around the building, thousands of people there for him.
Yeah.
So
and you're right. And I remember that. And as I recall, I think on the night of the visitation, of her visitation, we were able to, there was no limit. And the day of the funeral, which was just a day later, there was a limit. And, everybody had a lot of questions, a lot of unknowns at that time. And everybody, it took time for us and the public to adjust to how we're going to do things. Ultimately, it was really interesting to see how things did evolve. And there were people that would call and say, hey, we know you're having a funeral for this individual on this day. What's your processional route going to be? And then they would show up on the processional route and show their support to the family that way. There were times where we'd drive through a church parking lot because that individual, they would have been at the church for their funeral, and they couldn't. So we would notify that congregation that, hey, we're going to drive by the church through the parking lot on this day at this time as we go to the cemetery. So anybody who wants to show up and support the family from your auto, you can do that. We had times where there was a lot. Yeah, I remember distinctly, a friend of mine's wife died, and I got out to the visitation. It was at the funeral home in Chatham, and there were all kinds of people in the parking lot, but they were outside, and some of them had put chairs out around their trunks and opened their trunks, and they said, well, we know we can only have so many people inside, so we all decided we still wanted to visit with each other. So
that's amazing.
So we all showed up, and they went in as they could, and they came out and spent time with each other and recalled the life of that individual, and all the times that they shared. And so people adapted and found a way. Again, all those actions that I just described are attending to emotional, relational, and spiritual needs. And certainly, culturally, we tend to think that the survivors are the immediate family, but it's extended family, it's unrelated family, friends who are just as close as family, and that sometimes closer. And then anybody that person interacted with, whether that be coworker or just the community, faith community, whatever it was. So people impact a lot of lives, and a lot of lives are impacted at the time of death. So the survivors are much more than what we traditionally think of. And lastly, there's a lot of people who show up who didn't really know the person who died, but they know somebody in the family who does survive. And so they show up to support them. So there's a lot of, this probably flows into, our discussion in terms of, when people think about, would I be good in that? Or would I want to do that? what I like to point out to people, and I do a monthly lunch, community lunch program where we invite people to come and they have lunch with us, and we just talk about the different aspects of funeral home, advanced planning, things like that. But one of the things I always point out is that you could stand on the front porch of our main facility at downtown Springfield, and you look out and cars are going by, and the world's very, very busy on the outside. But if you just turn around and look inward, inside that building, and life slows down. People stop their lives. They show up, and they show up to support the family that's had a family member that's died. There's a lot of beautiful human moments that are taking place within those walls. And it's a lot of people laughing, a lot of people crying, a lot of people sharing stories, under normal times embracing and shaking hands, and all those things that take place, because they know it's a safe environment. That's what the environment is for, to do that. So anybody who thinks that they would be good at facilitating that and helping people come up with ideas to create meaningful ceremony. Funeral directors, what you referred to me as, we always internally, we refer to our team as the directors as ceremony specialists. And do that because, one, I think words do teach, and I want our team to understand that part of our role is to help people explore an avenue that's going to be meaningful and appropriate for them. As I said earlier, not everybody's going to do the same thing, but hopefully we can help them have an experience that, again, is going to not only honor and remember the person that's died, but help them attend to emotional, relational, and spiritual needs. So somebody who's considering this, if they think that would be something that they could help do, then they should explore this further. Certainly requires organizational skills and commitment and things like that.
I'm just curious, in the schooling part of it, when you're in mortuary school, do they teach you how to separate your emotions and all of the personal things that you might bring into the position? Do they teach those classes? Like, are there certain ones like that?
Well, it's been a while since I've been there, so I don't know all the specific classes, but I know I had a very good class called Psychology of Grief for instructor for that type of those type of classes. And I don't know if I was just lucky that I had that type of guy, but I don't know that it was necessarily encouraged that we separate our emotions from things. I think we do our best when we bring our total selves to the table, as long as I think it's just something that part of it's innate. And I don't know if I can say it as you either have it or you don't, but I think you develop through the work such an appreciation of life, because recognize how life can be short. Certainly we know that life can end suddenly. And so the people that I found be successful in the role are those that draw energy from being in that setting. And they may have just spent time with a family that was very emotionally draining for everybody. But they come out of that not tired. They come out energized and saying, boy, this is what we're going to be doing to assist this family. And I've seen people that, through my time here in the role that are energized. I've also seen people that they just can't handle it. And it emotionally drains them. So we have a couple tools that we try to help have people take when they're coming on board, that helps give us and them insight into how they may do in that role. It's application, but it's certainly helpful, and it's been pretty darn accurate through the years in terms of helping us predict, somebody's ability to do well in a role. And that's, on the funeral director side of things. I would certainly point out to anybody that depending on the organization you go into, there are going to be career path opportunities as well, again, depending on the organization. At one time, it was a very family-dominated profession, and that's less and less the case. And for those families that are, like our organization, family-owned and operated, there just isn't as much family to fill the role. So you got to find people who are good funeral directors, but also, if somebody has another skill set that they can bring to help manage and operate different aspects of the business, that's good. Now, we have non-funeral directors who fulfill important roles, like a controller in the organization and the business office, and somebody who can assist with communications and marketing, and our administrative professionals. Our whole model is built on having a team of people, just kind of like other businesses, sports teams, professions. They've really evolved, and you have more specialization to help get the job done. That's part of how we've evolved our model. And that part of that is designed to help ensure that people have a quality of life away from work as well. So they're not constantly on call. They're not constantly getting up in the middle of the night, not constantly working, not the 60 to 80 hour a week marathon that truly it was at one time.
You mentioned assessments, and I'm a big proponent of trying to find out if this is meant for you before you actually go to school, and hence me really creating this YouTube channel to give people an access to someone who does this and can tell you the good, bad, and the ugly, and how to go down that path. Could someone take an assessment before they even decided that they wanted to go to school for it, or is it only when they take the job?
Well, no, I think, I'm only familiar with the tools we use, and we use them essentially a lot in the interview process. And we don't make every decision based solely on those tools. There's other factors, but I've certainly learned that those assessment tools are valuable. But I would think that, I don't know of any funeral service specific in terms of people taking that before they go to school. But I certainly know that I could, if somebody contacted me and said, hey, what assessment do you use? The first one, we have two. The first one, it's a 10 to 15 minute exercise. And it's amazingly kind of spot on for people. And then once that's taken, we have a longer one. But if anybody were considering it and saying, hey, what would that tool look like? We'd help them with that. And, we have a couple individuals right now that are one who's in the high school age that's developed an interest, and we're trying to assist them in kind of exploring things a little bit further. And then somebody that's already just enrolled in mortuary school. A lot of our recruiting efforts, which were a lot easier before the last year, we do mortuary college visits and just meet people that way, hoping to get that back in that. But those are people who are farther along in the journey. I think I was a small program, but we started with 22 people, finished with 7. So your suggestion is probably very good in terms of, don't spend 2 years in school if you're not gonna, or 4 years or whatever it may be, if you don't really know that that's for you. I think there's probably a fair amount of misconceptions about what funeral directors do. And in our organization, and not all organizations are going to be like this, but ours is, we specialize. So we have what we call the family care team, the funeral directors that assist families. And we have the professional care team. Those are funeral directors who take care of the deceased individual. And I think a lot of perception on the outside is that funeral directors in general spend 90% of their time with the deceased person. And the rest of the day is taking care of, other things. The reality is it's probably 90% family time and 10% deceased care. Now, again, with us specialized, that ratio isn't completely accurate, but you understand what I'm saying is that our efforts are really about creating meaningful ceremony to help people attend to emotional, relational, and spiritual needs. That's really what our role is.
That's a great point though too, Chris, that there are other opportunities in mortuary that is not just working with families. It is actually somebody who might want to care for the deceased person. So do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's definitely a specialized role, and there's definitely a need for those individuals as well. And a lot of times the assessment tool will point to saying this is where your proficiency is going to be at. They are two different proficiencies, and that worked. The person who would be proficient for what we call professional care, that worked okay in the 60s and 70s, that profile. But again, the world's just changed so much, and there's just so much information, misinformation. You really got to have a personality to sit with a family. You've got to have you got to be somebody that's not going to just kind of respond to orders, so to speak, as opposed to being able to listen and then make meaningful suggestions. And then once the family does make the decision, then it is 100% your obligation to honor and implement and invest in what they've decided on. Excellent.
As we wrap up, Chris, what advice would you give to someone who is contemplating this as their career path?
Well, I'd probably to what you questioned about, but I would say definitely try to connect with a funeral home locally where you're at, and see if there's an opportunity for you to somehow shadow, observe, work, to see if you can learn a little bit more about it. But I would also caution somebody not to go to one funeral home. You may only have one funeral home in your community, but don't judge all funeral service by that. Explore. I would certainly say visit Dr. Alan Wolfelt's website for the Center for Loss and Life Transition. Now, he's not a funeral director, and it's not funeral home specific, but his work aligns so much with what we should be helping families accomplish through ceremony, that he's a great resource. He has so much writings. He has books. He has a customer service A to Z book for funeral homes. So learn a little bit about it. Look into the educational requirements and opportunities, and just explore. I would say that most of the people that I've interviewed over the course of my career, when I ask them, how did you become interested in funeral service? They would say that most of the time they point back to an experience they had where my mom died, or my dad died, or somebody that was close to them died, and they were touched either by the funeral director directly themselves in terms of, wow, I watched them and they just helped us so much, or just the experience in general that, wow, I could see myself doing this, helping people through this. And that's where most people come from. The other people, and I'm probably saying it might be as high as 95%, maybe 90% of those who really have had an experience, with loss. Even if you look at me, I mean, that's ultimately, I had other introduction to it, but ultimately it was loss that drew me here. And so I'm trying to think of what the other 5% would be in terms of what drew them to it. But right now it's not coming to me. So it's definitely a dominant on the having had the experience, but it's not a requirement. So if somebody just says, for whatever reason, I'm drawn to this, I would think that the people who didn't have that death experience and are drawn to it, I'm thinking that more of those folks tend to be more interested in what I'm going to call the science portion, so the professional care of the deceased, And ultimately, obviously, that's part of what the role of a funeral home is. It is to help plan for what will happen to the deceased individual. Is that going to be burial, or, is it going to be cremation, anatomical donation? That's part of what needs to happen. But the other part is what needs to happen for this family. Their world has changed, and they need to take a little time to assess where they're at and where they need to go, and hopefully get pointed in a good direction. And ceremony has a lot of power to help set the stage right. Doesn't mean that you have the ceremony and everybody's healed. It takes time, but it can at least be a good beginning in the process. So that's my advice. Obviously, the other advice would be is just, think about what's important to you in your world. Give thought to what you think is going to be something that you can invest your time in, hopefully for a lifetime, and that you can find a good career to not only help yourself and your family, but to help others. I will say that funeral service is one of those, I don't know if it's right to say it's a rare opportunity, but it is an opportunity where you can, while helping neighbors in a really beautiful way. And certainly I've known people that we've served from other avenues in life, but I also have friends that I met solely through work. I can recall the first family I ever met with. It's not that I was well prepared for that meeting, because I wasn't, but we got through it, and we did have a very nice ceremony. And afterwards, the husband of the person who died invited me over, made me chili, gave me a Falstaff. And that was the first family I ever met with. And it was, from that point on until he died, we were friends. I got invited to birthday parties, all that. And in my role today, I'm not I don't get to interact with families the same way that I did when I first started. So those days are not like that anymore. But that still happens. You still make that connection with people. So the funeral directors that do serve in that role, they get to meet people in that same deep way. And I don't know how many careers out there where you can really say that happens.
Yeah, you guys really impact lives. I mean, that's one of the things where I got into coaching too. We're impacting lives in different ways, but we're definitely impacting. And I'll never forget your dad putting his arm around my shoulder when I went to sit at my dad's casket. And, and we've been around your family a long time, and you guys do, this is not a plug. This wasn't a commercial. This is actually educational, but you do such a great job on really creating a wonderful ceremony for people, whatever that ceremony might look like for that family.
Yeah. And your dad was a special guy in 1989, right?
Yeah. 31 years ago. Yeah.
What's that?
Almost 32 years ago. Yes. So.
Yeah. I remember I was in St. Louis at the time and I drove back, and but I also have fond memories of your dad.
Thank you. Yeah, that we had good times together with Butlers. And that's what's interesting about how the industry's changed since 32 years ago, and how funerals, like you mentioned earlier, they have changed, and they probably will keep changing. And they've really had to pivot during COVID. And I really commend you guys for the way you had pivoted this whole time. So kudos to all of you. Any last parting messages?
No, it just, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. I guess maybe the final message would be maybe something that we were talking about earlier, is that for no matter what career path somebody takes, and no matter what stage of life they're in, they shouldn't underestimate the importance of margin. And what I mean by that is, margin, you kind of tend to think of that being a financial term, but margin is essential in many areas of your life. So, you have margin in your life so that you have time for not only your endeavors, whether that be being a student or being a student athlete or being in your career, whatever it is, you need to have time to attend to your health, to your spiritual well-being, to your friendships, and to your family. And so in today's world, it's very easy to develop or get into things that really rob people of margin. And I would just encourage anybody to do what they can to help recognize and accept their own personal limitations, keep space in their schedule, keep breathing room and margin in their life. And whatever their faith background is, just rely on that and invest in that, because it'll pay them dividends, moving forward in a long way. And the very, very final piece would be that as you develop and go through your career and whatever path of life you choose, there are going to be problems. There was an author by the name of Theodore Rubin, and I can't remember what his career was. I wish I could think of it right now, but I know he wrote, and problems arise. And we've all heard it, well, it's not the problems that arise, it's how you respond to them that makes a difference. But he said essentially something to the effect that the problem is not that there are problems. The problem is that we expect otherwise, and that thinking that having problems is a problem. So just understand that there are going to be challenges, no matter what stage of life that you're in. And the best thing you can do is try to address those with a clear mind when your emotions are at rest, and to try to determine the best path forward. And if you ever think that you've taken the wrong path, never too late to step off the path you're on and look for a different route.
Yeah, so there's another road down another path. I love that, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
That is profound. Thank you. That's a great way to end this. So I appreciate your time. Thanks.
I appreciate your time. Yeah, it's great to connect with you, Amy. And thank you for what you're doing in your role, impacting lives, So that's one thing I will tell you. I thought I was done, but certainly over the years, one of the things I've heard from families is, and as they receive guests who come here to either see the person who died or to see them, but as they always say, we heard so many stories tonight that we weren't aware of. We had no idea. And that just points out again that the impact that we all have, we're never always fully aware of it. Certainly our family and loved ones aren't always aware of it. So we need to be very, very careful about our interactions in life, whether that be with our immediate family or a coworker or a student, fellow student, whatever it is, again, wherever we're at. Just try to do our best to help each other. Yeah.
Amen to that. Thank you. What a great way to end.